All right. Well, we're at 3 minutes after, so we want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time. So good morning and welcome everybody to the NJ-ZIP, the Zero Emission Incentive Program webinar for buyers. If you are also a vendor, there will be a vendor webinar later today at 1 p.m. But we're glad to have all here. Today's focus and this morning's focus rather will be on the requirements, eligibility, and process for applicants, buyers of zero emission vehicles, are fantastic businesses in the state of New Jersey. So I will be handing it over to Tim Sullivan, the CEO of the New Jersey Economic Development Authority, to start us off for the day. Tim?
Great, thanks, Victoria, and thank you all for being here. We really appreciate your interest in the program. I promise I'll be brief because you all came to learn something about the program, not to hear me talk, and so I promise I'll be brief. But let me just wanted to offer kind of a bit of a framing perspective on why this program has been created and sort of where it fits in the overall strategy that Governor Murphy is pursuing for economic development, for environmental sustainability, and for environmental justice. Because I think this program is the not unique but rare, and we don't have enough of them where there's a program that does so many things all at the same time. Creates jobs, supports environmental sustainability, and helps alleviate and address environmental justice concerns. And so again, as part of Governor Murphy's overall economic development strategy, we believe very strongly that there is a bright and strong clean energy economy to be created, and that is in the process of being created here in New Jersey. That's true with things like offshore wind. That's true in things like solar. That's particularly community solar and distributed solar generation. We also think it's true around electric vehicles. And our partners throughout government, whether that's the Board of Public Utilities under the leadership of Joe Fiordaliso, whether that's the DEP under the leadership of Acting Commissioner LaTourette, and before him, Catherine McCabe, just fantastic partners there. And under the leadership of the governor's office and Jane Cohen, who's now leading up the climate action and green economy office that the governor announced a couple weeks ago, we think there is just this extraordinary opportunity to really capitalize on the momentum that we have and to create jobs, to create economic activity, to support our sustainability, and to address environmental justice. And that's what the ZIP program is all about. It's a pilot program. It's targeted. It is funded by clean energy funding that came from the governor's commitment to rejoining RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, as one of the first acts. There was emergency order, executive order, something in the single digits. I forget what it was, to rejoin the RGGI compact that New Jersey had fallen out of, which is great for a bunch of reasons. From an economic development perspective, we're thrilled that it generates cash to make investments in what we think will be job creating and emissions reducing technologies, much like the program we're about to talk about this morning. And so we think that this is an extremely exciting opportunity and program, and also an opportunity for us to pilot and learn. This is a new effort. This is a new program. We haven't done this before. We haven't done a vehicle voucher program before. We're piloting it in 2 communities in and around Greater Newark and in and around Greater Camden, both of which were selected after some pretty rigorous analysis done almost entirely by Victoria around where there are the biggest business needs, as well as the biggest sort of environmental considerations to take into account, both of which in this context driven by the ports in both of those great cities. So our ambition here is to run a successful program, run a successful pilot, and also to learn and hopefully scale it and get it right and make changes and expand and have it grow from here. Hopefully, if there's good market uptake and good participation and good feedback that we get from this program. So with that, thank you again for your interest in the program. We're deeply excited about it. On behalf of Governor Murphy, thanks for taking the time to be interested in the program. We hope lots of you will apply. We hope lots of you will find the program fits the needs of you and your business or communities you represent. And with that, I'll hand it back to Victoria to tell you all about the great program. And I will probably drop off in a couple minutes, but appreciate the chance to be with you. And thanks again for the interest in the program.
Thanks so much for that. Thanks for the context, Tim. So good morning again, everybody. With the great input from Tim and the background context on why we're doing this program, I'm going to be sharing my screen and starting the presentation to share some of the details of how the program will function, what the eligibility requirements are going to be, and and how you can walk through the basic application process, making sure that you have all the materials that you need in order to successfully apply. So you can see our little agenda here today, and we'll just get started. So what is NJZIP? Zero Emission Incentive Program. As Tim noted, it's a voucher style program piloted in the greater Camden and greater Newark area. One thing I did want to emphasize is that it is a first come, first serve program. So anybody who applies, who is eligible, the applications will be reviewed and vouchers reserved on a first come, first serve basis. The purpose of the program, as Tim said, I don't want to belabor the point, but we're trying to reduce the upfront cost of buying a zero emission medium duty vehicle for New Jersey businesses and institutions. This upfront cost is recognized for EVs or fuel cell electric vehicles to be more expensive than their gas or diesel counterparts. And so the goal here is to bring them closer to price parity so that you can consider a zero emission vehicle in lieu of a traditional gas or diesel vehicle. The voucher funding initially will be $15 million for the pilot program. As I noted, it is a first come, first served program, but we wanted to make sure that small and micro businesses had the same access and opportunity to apply as larger businesses. So we will be holding off and setting aside $5 million of that $15 million for small and micro businesses to ensure that, that the funding is not taken up so rapidly that they cannot participate and that you cannot participate. This is a key point that I want to make sure I had on the first slide, which is when will applications open? We will be opening applications 2 weeks from today on Tuesday, April 6th at noon Eastern. That means that the application portal will open for everyone. That includes both buyers, so folks like yourselves who have institutions or businesses in the state of New Jersey and are looking to purchase a zero emission vehicle, as well as for vendors. So right now, as a pilot program, we don't have pre-approved vendors, and so they'll be applying starting on April 6th as well. And we'll get into a little bit of the detail of that dance up front in a few slides. So I think a critical question to answer up front is who can participate? So you can see right here on the slide the basic criteria. So number one needs to be a New Jersey business or institution that's in good standing. You need to be purchasing a new zero emission medium duty vehicle from an approved vendor. You note here that it says vehicles, so it is possible to purchase more than one vehicle and receive more than one voucher. You need to register those vehicles in New Jersey and operate those vehicles at least 75% of the VMT or vehicle miles traveled in New Jersey for at least 3 continuous years after you receive the voucher. You also need to operate vehicles 50% vehicle miles traveled or more in the greater Camden or Newark areas for at least 3 continuous years after voucher receipt. And so that's where, when we're talking about that this is being piloted for the greater Newark and greater Camden areas, that's where that requirement comes in. There is also an option in case those vehicle mile travel cannot be reported on, that you can demonstrate that you have registered the vehicle with an address based in those communities and that the vehicle is domiciling in those communities, again, for at least 3 continuous years after voucher receipt. So I recognize I've just run through a lot of different terminology and requirements, and what I'm going to spend the next maybe 10 minutes on is defining some of these terms that are very specific to our program or that you might not be familiar with. So diving right in, what is an institution? So assuming that we understand the definition of a business, either a nonprofit or a for-profit, an institution is a nonprofit or an organization run for a public purpose. So you can see some examples here. You've got libraries or hospitals, schools and higher education, municipal utilities, public rec or community centers, cultural facilities, and local government entities. So we've got here as an example, municipalities or county level government. This particular program is not eligible to state government entities, again, to just ensure equitable access to the local communities where these vehicles will be operating. What is zero emission? Although it's right there in the name, you want to have no emissions coming out of the tailpipe of these vehicles. So you've got a little bit of a intensive definition here, but long story short, no emissions coming out of the tailpipe. You don't want emissions from the onboard source of power. And the examples that often come up are battery electric vehicles. Those are the ones that folks are typically most conversant with, but we also allow hydrogen fuel cell electric vehicles or other zero emission technologies that we haven't noted here. And it'll be required within the course of an application for you to provide proof that it's a zero emission vehicle. VMT, I defined it on the other slide, but VMT means vehicle miles traveled. So essentially when we say 75% VMT needs to be in the state of New Jersey or 50% needs to be in the greater Camden or greater Newark area, we're saying, you know, if you're traveling 150 miles, 200 miles in a day in your vehicle, you need to have, for the greater Camden and greater Newark area, at least half of that. So for 200-mile travel a day, you would have 100 miles in the greater Camden or the greater Newark area. What is medium duty? Now, this is a term that is used by the Federal Highway Administration, and it's based on the gross vehicle weight rating of a vehicle. So you can see on the left-hand side these class names. So for our particular program, we're defining medium duty to mean class 2B through class 6. There are a few different ways that sometimes that's defined, but for the program that we're having here for NJZIP, class 2B through class 6 are eligible for the program. It is not just trucks that are eligible. I want to make sure I underline that because that is a question that's come up a bunch. Trucks, buses, vans, specialty vehicles like, say, ambulances or small garbage trucks that are within those weight ranges are all eligible vehicles. You can see a little sample, some example vehicle types that would be eligible on the right-hand side of the screen here. What is an approved vendor? Now, this is another question that's come up quite a bit. Because we're doing this as a pilot program and we're opening the applications for both vendors and applicants at the same time, there are not currently any quote-unquote pre-approved vendors. But for your understanding, a vendor is any business that sells eligible zero-emission medium-duty vehicles. So again, a vehicle that doesn't emit any emissions from its tailpipe and meets those weight classifications that we specified on the previous page, those would be theoretically eligible medium duty vehicles. So if someone is selling those and they have these following, meet these following eligibility criteria, they can be assumed to be in the short term potentially eligible if they apply and are approved. So those businesses, those vendor businesses, need to register to do business in New Jersey and be in good standing in the state. They need to have at least 12 months of experience with zero emission vehicle sales or manufacturing. And they need to agree to the voucher terms. We will be, as I mentioned at the top of this call, we will be having a direct webinar with vendors later today. So they'll make sure that they're aware of what those voucher terms are, and we'll make sure to walk them through that process so that you won't have to worry about that as a buyer. I do want to flag that, again, because we're opening the application portal simultaneously for both vendors and for purchasers like yourselves, those vendors may not instantly appear on the drop-down list that we have in the portal of approved vendors. We anticipate it may take 2 or so weeks for those applications to come in and to be approved on a one-by-one basis. The last definition here on this slide is what is a vehicle domicile. This is just the place where the vehicle is housed when it's not operating. So say, for example, a school bus, when it's not running kids back and forth from their communities to their schools and is parked in the parking lot overnight, that would be its domicile location. This is a big definition, again, something that we defined for this program. So the greater Camden or the greater Newark area are the overburdened communities within or intersected by a 10-mile radius circle centered in Newark or Camden. So there's a lot of names on this list, but essentially the way you want to think about it is that if you started a circle and it was centered on Camden or Newark and you drew a big arc around it, the communities within that arc that are considered to be overburdened are eligible for this program. So when we're thinking about, again, back to the requirements that the vehicle miles traveled is how we're grading if you're within those communities, we have a requirement of 50% or more of the time in the greater Camden or greater Newark community. So if the community that you spend 10% of the time or something is not on this list, that's okay, as long as 50% of the time you're within these communities. Now to dive just right into what kind of voucher values are we looking at here? So we've been talking about we want to lower the upfront cost of vehicles to bring them closer to the price point that a gas or a diesel vehicle might have. So the values you can see on the screen here are based on those class weights that I brought up on the prior slide for class 2B through class 6. You can see here that the base value for class 2B is a $25,000 voucher, and the base value for class 6 is a $100,000 voucher. These vouchers, again, are only provided for vehicles that are zero emission medium duty vehicles that are used 50% or more of the time in the pilot communities. And the voucher value is provided at the end of the day after the vehicle has been delivered. There are stackable applicant bonus criteria. So it is possible, recognizing that small businesses, that women, minority, and veteran-owned businesses have additional challenges and have traditionally been underserved. We want to make sure that there's additional support in place for those businesses. As such, there are additional bonus criteria for them. So if you are a small business, you would be able to have an increase of 25% of the base voucher value. If you are certified in New Jersey as a women, minority, or veteran-owned business, for each of those qualifying criteria, you would be eligible for $4,000 additional per vehicle. We also have here a note of the small business vehicle scrappage bonus. I haven't brought this up yet, but I'll dive into a little bit more detail just in a moment. But if you are a small business, so you already are qualifying for that 25% increase of base voucher value, if you are directly replacing a vehicle, and that vehicle is model year 2009 or earlier, then you can receive an additional $2,000 bonus when you scrap your vehicle, which would then be a requirement. The stackable vendor bonus criteria I won't spend much time on. Like I said, we're going to have a vendor conversation later today, but there are additional bonus criteria for vendors who manufacture the vehicles in New Jersey. 25% or more of the cost of the vehicle is spent on labor and materials in New Jersey. And there's also a program for bonuses for vendors who conduct driver readiness and education trainings. So these would be additional trainings above and beyond anything that your personal business receives that benefit the general community. Again, these are both criteria that a vendor could qualify for rather than anything that you as a buyer would need to take action on. I do want to flag there are voucher limits. So one, the vouchers are limited by the total cost of the vehicle. So it is not possible to get a voucher that covers more than the cost of the vehicle. The best you could do would be to have the total cost of the vehicle covered. It is not possible to have additional monies after that cost is covered. Second, an applicant can apply for multiple vehicles within one application. So for instance, if you're looking to expand your fleet and you're looking to purchase 3 Class 6 vehicles and 2 Class 3 vehicles, that's completely acceptable within the bounds of this program. We do have a limit of $1.5 million per applicant for the pilot program. This is based on essentially 10% of the voucher pool. We want to make sure that everybody has sort of an equal shot at the voucher pool so that not a single applicant can purchase it all up. Finally, all disbursements are subject to appropriations and availability of funding. So as I noted before, it's a first come, first serve program. Of course, we will ensure as much as practicable that when we're nearing the end of our voucher pool, but if we receive many submissions in a single day, we may have to cap vouchers just based on availability of funding because these funds are appropriated to us. And so if they run out, we will have to stop the funding. And of course, as I noted, we will work to notify folks of that in advance of the funding running out. So I know I've just talked through a bunch of different numbers, but I thought it might be helpful to walk through a little bit of a sample voucher calculation. So for example, if you are a small women and veteran-owned business, so you want to buy a new Class 3 vehicle to add to your fleet, So you find an approved vendor that you're interested in, and they are selling a zero emission version of the medium duty vehicle you're looking for, and you get a quote of, in this example, $115,000 vehicle. The way that you can calculate the voucher, and this would be automatically calculated for you over the course of the application, but understanding that you might want to make your decision before you go through all the work of applying, this is the way you would think through it. So the voucher amount will be calculated by the base voucher amount. In this case, you're a small business, so you get that 25% bonus. Then, because it's a women and minority-owned business, you can get an additional $4,000 bonus per each of those qualifying criteria, certified qualified criteria. So you can see the calculation here. A Class 3 vehicle starts out at $55,000 for a voucher, multiplied by 1.25 to cover the 25% base increase from the small business bonus, adding $4,000 each. So you come out to a voucher amount of $76,750. So understanding that you've been quoted $115,000, you subtract that voucher amount, and the cost that you as a buyer pays up front would come down to $38,250. So that's the final cost that you would pay in order to purchase this vehicle. In order to participate in the program, I know that I mentioned earlier, the vendor needs to agree to some terms. One of those terms is that they accept the voucher as the final part of the payment. So you should never, out of your own pocket, be paying $115,000. You're not getting paid back. You're not getting a rebate with this voucher. You are not paying that upfront cost at all. So you would pay $38,250 to the vendor. And once the vendor delivers the vehicle and you register it and report that back to us, we would pay out to the vendor that final voucher amount. So the vendor gets the total cost of the vehicle, the total value of that electric vehicle, and you as a purchaser only has to pay that initial upfront cost, the difference between the voucher and the total cost. So how do we do this? How do you actually apply to this program? And I'm going to take a breath here and just pause for a second and remind folks, if you have questions, I'm seeing a few popping up in our Q&A. Please drop them in the Q&A. That allows us to respond since folks don't have audio or video. We'll be able to respond to those questions. It also helps us because we can download them and we will be uploading an FAQ later. So if you have questions as we're going through this, please drop them in that Q&A box and we will answer them at the end of this call where we're able. Okay, so diving into the application process. We've got an 8-step buyer application process here. So first things first, you find and select an eligible vendor and an eligible vehicle. Now, if you're going into the portal in a few weeks, maybe a few weeks after April 6th, after the program opens and some vendors have been approved, you might be able to see some vendors in a dropdown. However, what we would encourage is that you work proactively to find a vendor that you're interested in, find out if they're interested, if they will be applying for NJZIP, and encourage them to apply starting on April 6th. We've been reaching out to vendors and asking and proactively asking them to apply. So they should be aware of the program, but this is the way that you are able to, in a first come, first serve manner, one, apply early, and two, it's a bit of a long process to work with the vendor to make sure that you're finding the vehicle that will work for your application. So we encourage you to find that vendor up front. You'll be needing to apply together through this process. So step one, you find that eligible vendor, eligible vehicle that you like and you want to purchase within that medium duty zero emission vehicle category. We will be, I want to flag, uploading in the next day or two a list for courtesy's sake of vendors who currently sell zero emission medium duty vehicles. I do want to note that that will be up on the njeda.com/njzip webpage. And that information is intended just as a courtesy to give you a starting place for your research and outreach. It does not mean that those vehicle vendors are pre-approved. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Step two, is that you'll go into the application portal and you'll populate the application up through the vendor and vehicle selection. So what that means is that you will be entering in your business information, your contact information, your employee identification number, your EIN. You'll be uploading your tax clearance certificate, information to ensure so that we can verify that you're as a entity are an eligible organization. So you'll be entering some personal, not personal, rather, some business entity information. You'll get to a screen rather, where you'll be able to select a vendor and a vehicle. At that point, when you select that vendor and vehicle and hit next, the vendor will be notified that you have selected them as their vendor, you've selected their vehicles, and they'll get an email notifying them of such. This should not be a surprise to them. You should already have a relationship with them because as part of the process, it will be required that there is intent to purchase the vehicle. We'll go into a little bit more detail on documentation on that later. As I noted previously, it is possible that in that dropdown, there may not be yet your vendor listed. It does take 2 weeks or so for an eligible vendor who's already applied to be approved and be added to that list. So whatever you've entered up to that point will be saved. And when the vendor has completed their piece, the buyer can check back in and continue the application. So you'll receive a notification. The vendor's done their job. You just said, I'm buying this vehicle from this vendor. And the vendor came in, they put in the specification sheets, they put in the warranty information, they filled out all that charging information about the charging infrastructure if it's a battery electric vehicle, for example. They made sure that all the technical pieces about that vehicle that you're not expected to be an expert in, that the vendor is expected to be an expert in, are uploaded and shared with you and your application. So you'll receive that notification that they've completed their piece. You, at that point, can complete the rest of the application. That includes making sure that you populate the information about your vehicle if you're replacing your vehicle. You need to make sure that you've uploaded all of the documentation that's required for submission. And you'll pay the final application fee, which is $1,000. And then you can hit submit. Once it's submitted, our team will review the application, and if the buyer, vendor, and vehicle are determined to be eligible and the funds are available, we will approve the voucher, inclusive of all the qualifying bonuses. So it'll show not just the baseline voucher value, but all of the additional bonuses that we went through the calculation on, if you're eligible for them. And you'll receive an email reserving that funding. The voucher funds then will be reserved for 6 months from that date. Within those 6 months, there are 2 things that are going to take place. One is that the vendor and the buyer, you will be executing our voucher agreement with NJEDA. So this is an additional documentation step that formalizes the agreement that you will be complying with the, for example, 50% vehicle miles traveled within the greater Camden and Newark area, and protection for you because your vendor will also agree to accept the voucher funding as part of their final payment. So you won't be required to pay it, and they'll be supporting you, for example, with ensuring that there's maintenance facilities accessible to you in the state. The second thing that's going to happen during that 6-month period or less if the vehicle's delivered more rapidly is that that the vendor will, of course, manufacture or procure the vehicle and deliver it to you. When that vehicle is delivered to you, you then will need to register the vehicle, and the final large step is submitting that vehicle registration proof back to NJEDA. Once NJEDA receives that proof of registration, as well as any proof of scrappage if it's required, we can review that and approve it, which is on the next slide. I do want to pause here again. I know I mentioned scrappage a little bit earlier. Scrappage is defined as drilling a 3-inch by 3-inch hole in the engine block, as well as cutting through the chassis frame of the vehicle. Scrappage is only required in the case that you are directly replacing a gas diesel, or other non-zero emission vehicle directly with the vehicle that you're purchasing through the NJZIP voucher program. If you are purchasing a zero emission vehicle to expand your fleet, say you're adding the greater Camden area to a delivery service, and so you need an additional vehicle, there's not a scrappage requirement if you're expanding your fleet. Similarly, if your vehicle that you are directly replacing is, for example, a model year 2010, that model year would not be mandatory to scrap either. So I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. So scrappage is only required, as you see here, for vehicles model year 2009 or earlier that are being directly replaced. So that's just a point I wanted to underline. Now, you've submitted your registration information, any other remaining documentation or proof of scrappage. So we review that submission, and assuming that everything's in order, the voucher that you've applied for is assigned to your vendor who can redeem those funds from the NJEDA. There is a requirement that as participants in this program, the buyer and the vendor would respond to NJEDA's any audit requests that we have to confirm that you're complying with the terms that you agreed to, as well as using information about your operation to inform future program design. If something's not working, we want to make sure we understand it and we can fix it moving forward, transforming this from a pilot into a long-term program. Some of the things that we may audit may be vehicle usage, so making sure that it's being used for the commercial or institutional purpose that it was purchased for. Making sure that it's continuing to be registered in New Jersey. So if your business decided to move to a different state, that if it's no longer registered in New Jersey and no longer operating in the pilot communities, that you would be out of compliance with the voucher terms. So now we've gone through sort of the basic application process. We've gone through the eligibility criteria. What does it actually mean when you need to apply? What is the final sort of information that you need to have in front of you when you're applying? So first, just as an administrative point, let's get access to the portal. So you can go in today to our portal and you can create an account. You can see on the left-hand side, there's a link there, and we'll make sure that these slides and a recording of this information is up on our website, so you'll be able to get access to this. But you can create an account today, and all that does is create a login for yourself so that you can come back in when the application opens and click right in. This link will bring you to the register page. If you've already applied for other grant programs with NJEDA or other loan programs with NJEDA through this portal, you may already be in our system. In that case, you can just click the Sign In tab, just one over to the left from the Register tab. Or if you're already in our system, but you applied through a different sort of legacy portal, then you may receive an email notification where you'll be able to log in through that account. And you can see the tab just to the right there that says Redeem Invitation. So depending on what your status is with NJEDA, you can either register, sign in, or redeem an invitation. All of these will help you create or access your account. From that account, you will be able to apply once the program is live by clicking on one of these blue buttons within our programs.njeda.com website. The one that you'll be wanting to click is the NJZIP purchaser application, and that'll give you access to the whole application process, where you'll see typical fillable fields like you do on pretty much any online form. You know, if you're purchasing something and you have to enter in your information, it looks quite a bit like that. So you'll click into that, and what are you going to need to do then? Well, first, as I noted, you'll log in. Second, you'll be entering in your organization's basic entity information. I know I ran through this briefly earlier, but that includes your legal business name, any doing business as names, your mailing address within the state of New Jersey, what kind of organization you are. Are you an LLC? Are you a partnership? Are you a government entity? Your EIN, and your contact information. So for this application, for this vehicle, who is the person that's going to be checking their email, checking their phone to make sure that they're applying, completing all the steps, and proceeding forward. You'll also want to have your tax clearance certificate, which lists the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. I flagged this on a little bit of a later slide, but I do want to just make sure that I underline, italicize, bold here. It does need to list the New Jersey Economic Development Authority. If you apply for your tax clearance certificate today, one, it is a free process and we'll provide the link. But two, that tax clearance certificate is active for the next 6 months. So it would still be active if you apply, within a relatively short time frame. So you can get that today and not have to have it be a piece of paperwork that you're looking for and scrambling for when you're trying to apply. I do want to flag that as with many things, because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, sometimes it's a little slower to get documentation from the state. So although we have allowances for that, and you'll be able to submit your application even if some of that paperwork is still pending, I did just want to flag that it is a piece of documentation you can get now and have it in your folder and ready to submit when you want it to apply. You'll also want, when you get started, the vendor name and the zero emission vehicle make and model. As I noted previously, if the vendor has not yet been approved, you might be paused in your application submission, but all your work up to that point will be saved. And once you are able to select your vendor name and zero emission vehicle model and make, that'll be a key piece in order to create that connection that sends the email to your vendor and says, hey, you've got an application and you need to finish this paperwork. You will be required to have proof of intent to purchase. So again, as I said, the first step in our application process is finding a vendor and a vehicle that you want to purchase. And so as part of that conversation, we'll want to see some proof that those conversations have taken place. So you need to provide a quote or purchase order or similar in order to demonstrate that intent to purchase. We will also require entering the vehicle operation location. That vehicle operation location needs to be within the greater Camden or greater Newark area. There'll be a list of all the municipalities, so you can select which one either is exclusively where you'll be operating or one of the primary areas where you'll be operating. And then finally, what is the new vehicle use? So you'll need to, there's a drop-down list there that gives you a number of options of what kind of vehicle it is and what you might be using it for: deliveries, transportation, etc. So that's how you get started. Now, you might also have some additional applicable features. So for example, if you are a small business, which in this pilot is defined as a business with less than 25 employees or less than $5 million in annual revenue, you'll be required to submit tax documented staff counts as appropriate to your company type. So we have here two of those tax document options, and tax documented revenue as appropriate to your company type. So again, depending on if you're a partnership versus an LLC or what have you, you may be required to provide different materials. If you are not a small business, this material is not necessary to provide. So again, a small business being defined as less than 25 employees total or $5 million in annual revenue. If you are a woman, minority, or veteran-owned business, you can declare this, but if you are not certified, you would not be eligible for our bonus. So I would encourage you, and again, I'll show a link on a later slide, to register as a women, minority, or veteran-owned business in order to qualify for that bonus. And if you're replacing a vehicle, we'll be requiring different vehicle use cases and general specifications: the model year, the fuel type, typical fuel usage, and typical annual mileage of that vehicle that you're replacing. And then finally, the vendor's filled out all their information. It's popped back over to you as the buyer. The approved vendor is going to complete all of those things that I've noted before: the charging requirements, the warranty, the maintenance plans, the vehicle specifications. You don't need to worry about that. Once they've filled that out, you're going to need to make sure that you have a signatory who's authorized to sign for your application. This does not need to be the same as the contact person, but it needs to be a person who's legally responsible for the entry. So there's a few examples here, depending on what type of organization you are, of who would be the appropriate signatory for your organization. And then finally, you'll need to have the payment method ready. Credit card or check are both acceptable. However, you can hit submit if you're going to be submitting a check for payment, but we won't be able to process the application until the check is confirmed received. So, just as a note. So these are just some links. Obviously, there's not time in a 1-hour webinar to go through every single process, but there are links here. You can get your tax clearance certificate. As I said, you could get that today, and this link will bring you there. I do want to flag once again, it needs to be in the drop-down selected for NJEDA through the business incentives. You can download, if you are already registered, you can download your women, minority, or veteran-owned business certificate from this portal. If you are not yet registered, you can start the registration process, and all of the documentation that's required for that is included within this link. That does include a $100 registration fee for that designation. I anticipate that anybody who is listening in on this webinar is already registered to do businesses in New Jersey, but if not, there's a link here for how to get registered to do business in New Jersey. And as I noted, you can see here at the bottom, it may take longer than usual due to COVID-19 to get some of this documentation. So as possible, I recommend download it today, download your information today, have it ready, put it in a folder, and then when the application opens, you can upload it right there. I know that I mentioned a little bit earlier that we'll have a vendor list available on our website as a courtesy. That will just be on njeda.com/njzip. We'll also be updating there any additional info around this program, anticipated to include this recording, this deck, etc. We will be uploading, as I noted, I'm seeing a bunch of Q&A come in. We'll be uploading an FAQ sheet once it's been reviewed and approved by the Attorney General. We'll be uploading that to the website as well. So any information that you're looking for will be up there, including the vendor list, as I said, which is for courtesy and does not mean that they're pre-approved, but hopefully is a helpful starting place to start some dialogues about zero-emission vehicles you could purchase. And as I flagged earlier, here's the link to the application portal where you can create your account today in that first link. Again, that's just creating a login account. It doesn't let you go in through the application yet, or where you can apply once the program goes live on April 6th. So with that, we have 15 minutes left. So I'm going to be opening up our Q&A. All right. So if you'll bear with me while I pull this up. All right, just going through, starting from the top. So patients, there's an initial question here about how to get access to the webinar and recording.
Yes, and I posted into the chat that we will be recording both of these webinars for purchasers as well as the webinar for vendors and making them available for viewing. Most likely on the NJZip site on our website. We'll link to it, and I've posted that link into the chat as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I have here a specific question about a municipality, Haddon Heights. I don't believe it is included on our list, but I can verify that immediately right now.
So I pulled that up. I'm going to just jump in because I scanned through and I was going to try and make, in case we had a lot of questions, which it looked like there were.
Appreciate.
So the separation for, so Haddon Heights is within 10 miles, but it isn't considered an underserved community. So that's the, and I have the language as soon as I hit the right button here. So and you can see this on our website on the NJZip program. For the purposes of the pilot, the greater Camden and greater Newark areas are defined as the overburdened communities within or intersected by a 10-mile radius of those. So there are very specific municipalities that are included, which is the reason I'm guessing that Haddon Heights isn't there. It's not considered an overburdened community.
Correct, correct. The one thing I wanted to flag was that this question also asked if you were living or working in that area. Does that impede your ability to apply for the program? The requirement of the program is that one, the vehicle is purchased and used for a business or institutional purpose. So it needs to be purchased by a business. If you're an individual owner operator, that counts. If you're purchasing something for your personal use, say you like going camping and you wanted to get, a larger vehicle to support that, that would not be covered by this program. It is for business or institutional use. It is okay if the business is based in a town that is not in the list. The vehicle needs to operate 50% of the time within those designated communities. So especially in a case like the example that Patience was giving around Haddon, that it's not considered itself to be an overburdened community, but if we can see the impacts of emission reduction on that surrounding community, and if you can prove that the vehicle is traveling in that area, 50% or more of its vehicle miles traveled, then it could still be eligible. I saw a question here, what is the criteria to qualify as a small business? I know that we covered this, but just to address it directly, 25 or less employees or fewer employees, or $5 million or less in annual revenue. Are vouchers available for charging equipment and infrastructure? No, the vouchers exclusively are based on the vehicle cost. So as I noted, the vouchers are capped at the total cost of the vehicle that is of the vehicle. So that does not include charging equipment or charging infrastructure. But that piece of the cost is not covered within this program. There was a question about the list of eligible vehicles and vendors. If they'll be included in a dropdown. Yes. So a vendor, once they are determined to be eligible, and we actually got another question here about in the chat about if vendors should register if they don't have a purchaser. If vendors don't have a direct purchaser already, we certainly encourage you to register. However, the way that the system is set up is not supportive of connecting vendors to buyers through the portal. So what I would recommend is if you register as a vendor, you'll show up in the dropdown, so it'll be easier for applicants and for the folks who are on this call to find you, but that you should connect previously and directly with the buyers in order to be able to demonstrate one of the pieces of required documentation when you're applying, which is proof of intent to purchase, so a quote or a PO. So you should have a relationship with your vendor before you come on the application. There's a very specific question about how a business is determined to be female owned or minority owned. I'm not sure on the exact percentages, but if you want to answer that, Patience.
I sure do. So if you're registered, so because you need to be a registered women-owned business, the qualifying percentage for a registered women-owned business in the state of New Jersey is 51% of the ownership interest.
Awesome, thank you very much. And the link that we provided in the deck, which as we noted will be uploaded, can give you some more direct information about those requirements. There's a question in here again about sort of how to find vendors. We will be uploading either later today or sometime tomorrow the potential vendors list. As I noted, these are not necessarily pre-approved vendors, but they're vendors who are listed publicly as selling zero emission medium duty vehicles that we've been able to verify, and that those vendors have reached out and told us that they are planning to apply to the program. So that should give you a good starting point. And as I said, that'll be up in the next day or so. And that'll be on the njeda.com/njzip website. And I apologize, I'm just reading through the questions here as we go. So Patience, if there's anyone that you wanted to call out in specific, I'd be happy to.
There were several questions in there about would we post the links in the chat. So in the chat are links to the program on our site, are links to how you can get your tax clearance, how you can register as a minority women veteran-owned business, as well as a link to how to register your business in the state of New Jersey.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, there's a question here if school districts and municipalities are eligible buyers, that they are eligible for this program. Schools and municipalities are considered to be institutions, so they would be eligible for this program. There are a handful of questions about the application fee. I will have to verify that piece. Essentially, one, if there's an ability to have a reduced application fee, or if you are not approved, if the fee is returned. I'll have to verify that, and we will make sure that that's posted in the FAQ. So I'm just going to take a quick note of that. All right. There's a question about scrappage, or there's a few questions about scrappage. The requirement for scrappage is that the vehicle, if it is being scrapped, if it's the older vehicle and it's being directly replaced, it does need to be completely made, essentially disable the vehicle's ability to drive. So it does need to have, we'll need to have proof that there's a hole drilled in the engine block and that the chassis is cut through. We are not coordinating those services, and there aren't specific authorized locations for them that we're coordinating. So you can find a service that can conduct that for you, and just make sure that you have the photos of that scrappage. And there's a question essentially if you can submit the title after the vehicle scrap. That it's been scrapped. Yes, that's a helpful piece of proof, but we will need a photo of that hole drilled in the engine block and the chassis cut.
So I was going to see, Victoria, if I can help out on this a little because I've been searching through these, and there's a number of questions that are kind of similar. So if you're asking questions about when the potential vendor list is going to hit our website, or where you can find the potential vendor list, or if there's a list of approved vehicles, those seem to be in quite a few of them, so that you don't have to run through them. You can just answer those two, and I'll keep looking through to kind of lump them together.
Okay, great. Yeah. So yeah, that vendor list will be, like I said, there will be a potential vendor list that's uploaded to our njeda.com/njzip website. And as vendors are approved, you'll be able to see them in the drop down within the application. So they'll pop up, and if they're not there yet, your application will be saved at that point, and you'll have the option to reach out to your vendor to ensure that they've applied. And once they've applied and been approved, they'll show up in that drop down, and you'll be able to continue your application. I do encourage folks, April 6th, the application's open. You're able to, even without having a vendor, enter in a fair amount of information so that when your vendor is approved, you would be able to continue on rapidly to submission. And Patience, I think you wanted to have a comment.
Yeah, I did. I wanted to point out, because there are several vendor related questions, that we do have a vendor specific webinar at 1 p.m. today. And you can find a link to register for that on our website. That that webinar will also be recorded, and a link to that will be placed on the website. So I know we're limited in time. I'm going to try and have the questions more towards the applications and not the vendors, and then we'll answer vendors on the vendor webinar and then post that. But we'll have these questions for that webinar. So, within a couple of days, that video should be up there and those questions should be answered. There's a question regarding the life of the voucher, and because build lead time on some electric vehicles, or many electric vehicles, can be longer than 6 months. Is there an expiration on the voucher, or an option to file for an extension?
So the voucher is set at 6 months. If you can demonstrate prior to the voucher expiration, essentially that you've been acting in good faith and working towards that deadline, we are on a case-by-case can approve a one-time 6-month extension for that voucher. So in total, if you receive an extension, there would be a total of 12 months available for the voucher. But at that point, then it would be expired, and the voucher funds would go back into the voucher pool. So again, 6 months is the standard, and we'll examine extensions on a case-by-case basis. I do see a specific note about a few different types of businesses. If you are a business, whether it's a partnership, a single owner operator, a larger corporation, any type of business, so you can do delivery, you can do transit shuttles, you can have just, you know, I think I see here a pharmacy that delivers medication. All of these businesses and institutions are eligible as long as the vehicle is within a zero emission vehicle in the medium duty vehicle size and is used for that business or institutional purpose. They are eligible. I see a handful of questions about all of the links and how to apply. Thank you so much, patients, for dropping that into the chat. We will also upload this later, so you'll be able to copy and paste those. I do see a note here, if a third party can submit the buyer's information on the behalf. The requirement is that there's an authorized signer and a contact information. We don't restrict who that contact is. It's acceptable to have the contact be whoever the most appropriate contact is, but the authorized signer for the legal debarment questions that I've noted, that needs to be one of the ones that are listed in, that I had listed in the presentation, which will be uploaded on the website. And I know we're right at the end of time, and I know there's about a dozen more questions that we haven't been able to get to, but we will be taking all of these questions that I've answered verbally. We'll consolidate them into an FAQ list, and we'll answer them and upload them onto their website. I do apologize if I haven't gotten to your question, but just as a general reminder, one, businesses and institutions that operate 50% or more of their time primarily in the overburdened communities that are eligible for this if they are buying a zero emission vehicle that is medium duty. And the other piece that I will leave you with is that there's a lot of links that were dropped in this chat. There's a lot of links and information that we went through in this presentation. All of that will be available on our website. And I encourage you, as much as possible, download your documentation now, have it ready, and then on April 6th, you'll be sort of ready to go and get things uploaded. I will make sure that that we have, as promised, that vehicle vendor list uploaded for you guys to peruse and look through and have as a resource. Again, it's a courtesy resource as opposed to a guaranteed list of pre-approved vendors. But as I noted, they're vendors that we have spoken to who have said that they are planning to apply and who we have independently verified have medium duty zero emission vehicles. So hopefully it's a valuable and helpful resource to you. We are at the end of our time. Thank you all very much. We'll get that FAQ list updated as soon as possible, as soon as we get it finalized and approved by the Attorney General. And once again, I'm very excited for all of your enthusiasm and interest in this program, and we will work to get answers to any remaining questions as soon as practicable. Anything else, patients, before we wrap up?
I think we're good. I did post the link for the vendor webinar in the chat, so folks should have that now.
Yes, and again, that's for vendors. You're welcome to attend if you're a buyer, but it's to make sure your vendors know what they're doing when they're applying. So no need to join if you are not a vendor. All right. Thank you all so very much. Have a fantastic day, and looking forward to you participating in NJZIP moving forward. Thank you.